Welcome, guys, to another episode of Burning Platform. This time, people call me Vinnie Vertical because I'm always basically pushing vendors. Why aren't you developing industry functionality? So it's a real pleasure to have today Dave Hofferberth with SPI Research, who has basically convinced hundreds of vendors to focus on an industry called professional services. He's Mr. PSA. Dave, great to have you here. Love the background. You're my neighbor in Florida, but you had to pull up Boston in the background. Tell us more about yourself.
Well, sure, Vinny. And yeah, I love Naples. I love Boston. So, what the heck. In case those of you who don't know me, my name's Dave Hofferberth, and I'm the founder and one of the managing directors of Service Performance Insight, or SPI, or SPI Research, as we're called. I've been an analyst covering professional services for a little over 20 years now. And so that's very atypical because not a lot of people cover the professional services market. But when I started SPI Research 15 years ago, next month will be 15 years, I focused on benchmarking professional services. And my business partner, Jeannie Urich, and I, 14 years ago, created the Professional Services Maturity Benchmark. And we use it to help organizations assess performance and then prioritize improvements. And no time like the present, 2020 has created a lot of challenges in the market. And people are now focused on performance improvement.
So let's talk about that. Clearly, the pandemic has turned several industries upside down. But services, my God, no travel, everyone moved to work from home. So tell me, what demands has that put on PSA, given that the industry has gone through so much change?
Yeah, the professional services automation, or PSA market, I watched it go from nothing to being fairly important in professional services, to now being extremely important in professional services. And it really has been preparing for something like a pandemic. It just didn't know it, because we always had a lot of the workforce work remotely. And when you do that, there's project collaboration issues, there's financial issues. It's just more difficult in professional services compared to some industries where everybody's in the same factory or the same warehouse or the same retail shop. So it's just different in this industry. And so the changes as a result of working from home and things like that have really elevated the need for PSA. There's no doubt about it. And you and I are sitting here on a Zoom call. We've seen Zoom and we've seen Microsoft Teams and we've seen GoToMeeting take off in importance, no doubt about it. And what we think PSA needs a better or a stronger linkage with those solutions. Again, it's something, we just haven't seen before. And it's not that you're working with a team 1 day a week on site and 4 days off site. You're working all the time off site. And so that ability to have a meeting with your colleagues is important. And I think one of the other areas that PSA has become more important is integration. Now, I've talked about integration since the early 2000s, but PSA now needs greater integration with human capital management solutions because your workforce is remote, your workforce is disconnected, and making sure you have the right people at the right price with the right skills, that's important. Also, CRM. Some people call it customer relationship management. I call it client relationship management. CRM and PSA integration is important because that connection between sales and delivery is so important. And those client-facing people have to work together. So, even though we've seen things like this before, you can definitely see PSA just coming to the forefront in the technology stack.
Dave, talking about CRM, I've heard from a few firms that we're moving away from timesheet-based services, right? A lot more outcome focused because people are like, I can't really see what people are doing when they're working from home. So the timesheet model may be a little bit challenged. what are you seeing in terms of, CRM or proposals in services?
Well, in terms of the people that do utilize PSA has the timesheet most PSA solutions have the timesheet capability. And again, like you said, I mean, you remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people working remotely, it just was taboo because you thought, what are these people doing while they're at home? They're playing with the kids, they're playing with the pets, they're not working. Well, now it's easier to understand what people have. There is projects that are set up so you understand your deliverables. PSA with templates kind of tells you, hey, this particular task should take 8 hours, not 28 hours, 8 hours. And so people are held to a standard there, which makes it easier for everyone, makes it more trustworthy. And then at the end of the day, you're filling out your timesheet. You can understand if a project is over budget or under budget or right on budget. So PSA early on was about project management, resource management, and time and expense capture. That was the foundation of PSA in the very beginning. So again, this all makes sense in the marketplace.
So Dave, over the 20 years that you've watched this category, you must have advised a couple of hundred vendors. It almost seems like too many, right? What is this PSA do? What is the pandemic doing? Is it filtering some of them out, or because the market is changing, creating an opportunity for new vendors to reimagine the category?
Vinnie, I always expect new entrants to the marketplace, and a lot of it is due to just new technologies. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I rarely used the word platform, but now that has become so important. Salesforce has got their platform. Microsoft has got their platform. Amazon has their platform. And so you see now the new vendors building on someone else's platform because it makes the integration easier. And another thing that happens is the great ones, again, if you start a company tomorrow and you are very successful in the first 5 years, you're still not going to be that big to where an Oracle or an SAP or a Microsoft or Workday can't, buy you because they see what you're doing and they realize you've got some good IP and they need it. So, the great companies that I tracked 20 plus years ago were all acquired by larger companies. I mean, it is what it is. And so, then over time, new companies came and they were acquired. And so I think of the 12 companies I originally wrote about in 1998, only a couple of them are still intact by themselves. It just they're acquired. And so, tomorrow there'll be a new technology. I mean, the landscape right now is so exciting from a technology standpoint with machine learning, AI, 5G, different automation capabilities that I think we're just starting to scratch the surface in every vendor, and the vendors as well or better than I do. Every vendor out there is really, working hard to take advantage of all these technologies. I mean, the next 5 years ought to be really exciting in this market.
So Dave, this is something you and I have talked about before. It's puzzled me all my life, right? Because there are so many industries that are not serviced well. Healthcare, fintech, retail, et cetera, et cetera. But none of the vendors we know and love really develop deep functionality for any of them. You must have the charm. Everyone gravitates towards professional services. How do you explain that? I mean, it almost seems like 100 people are chasing after one market and then a wide open market. Nobody really wants to make an investment in.
I think I was lucky when I really started the PSA practice at the Aberdeen Group. People, we had a great supply chain management practice. PSA, people were like, what the heck is this? And I think what I did then was convinced my executives at Aberdeen that I really wanted to focus on this particular market. And what's so interesting is that if you look at the largest software vendors, I worked for Oracle for 2 years, as you recall. That's when you and I met, 15, 16 years ago. Professional services was one of the largest markets to Oracle, but there was no money spent on it. They were in financial services, they were manufacturing, they were retail and distribution, they were government. And the people like me, I just stuck with it. And so when I started SPI 15 years ago, I just told everybody, this is all I'm doing is one market. This is it. And if it doesn't make it, that's fine. But I had the relationships with the ERP players and the PSA players and a few of the HCM players that we all worked together to decide what was relevant in the market and how to do it. So it wasn't all my decisions. I just kind of steered people.
But Dave, you also benefited from services have become endemic, right? It's not just, it used to be, I came from Pricewaterhouse. It used to be the big five, the professional services firms. Now services is everywhere. Field service, service as a percentage of revenue has become so important for every company. So I think you benefited from some of that too. PSA is not just, right?
Oh, Vinnie, you're exactly right. I mean, Jeannie and I, probably 60% of the companies we survey are independents. IT consultancies, management consultancies, architects, engineers, people like that. But the real interesting business is with what we call embedded service organizations. They're the PS within software, hardware, networking, manufacturing, healthcare, because at the end of the day, you can create the greatest product ever. But if nobody can deploy the product, nobody can train you on the product, nobody can assess when things aren't working well, that product fails. And so what we've seen over the past 15 years is that all of the great manufacturers, they all have a really big services arm. And Jeannie and I spend most of our time actually working with those companies because they're not PricewaterhouseCoopers. They don't have that classic consulting training. They really are there to help drive product innovation, drive customer adoption, and customer success. And so the world is changing, and that's where services is going, no doubt about it.
Well, Dave, your firm, you and Jeannie, you do an annual survey on PSA trends, right? And the next one is due, February, March?
Yep.
Can you give us an early indication? Any big changes coming up? I'm asking you to spill the beans a little bit early, but give us a few on what's changed this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't give exact numbers, but here's, when we start the survey every September and we conclude surveying at the end of November. So it's a 3-month period where we collect data. So if you can imagine, beginning in March, April, and May, I mean, my opinion was, and, I do this for a living, but my opinion was, the sky is falling. This is going to be the worst survey ever. I mean, I really, really believed we would have numbers like we did back in 2007, 2008. I really expected that. And as the surveys kept coming in, I kept saying, well, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's not bad. And to be honest with you, it looks at the very high levels like a fairly normal year. Now, growth isn't quite what it's been in years gone by, but it's not terrible. Headcount growth isn't bad. The one big change that I think you knew was that the fact that remote working has taken over the market. But again, I really thought that half the surveys that I received would say no on-site delivery, none at all. And it turned out I wasn't even close on that. It's definitely over 50% remote, but it's not 80%. Now, the one caveat is, as more surveys came in later in the year, I saw on-site work go down because I think a lot of people in September said, hey, this pandemic's over here soon enough. We'll be back to normal in October. And it just didn't happen. So, you and I know the working world has changed. Now everyone accepts a remote work. It's just accepted, especially in our industry. So I think it's you and I are going to get on planes again. Don't worry about it. But who knows? Maybe it'll be a little less, 10% less, 20% less than in years gone by.
I'm not complaining. Any other thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, when you asked me to some of the issues, I sat back and thought, and again, the way Jeannie and I have built this model for professional services, we look at things like leadership, like sales and marketing, like talent, like delivery, like finance. And I think the concern that I've got, that we've got, that everybody should have is, again, working remotely is wonderful. Working remotely is wonderful. But how do you train future leaders if you're not together? How do you do a better job of selling? That's a big thing, because you're used to going to clients, meeting with them, shaking hands, taking them dinner, talking. Now you're doing it the way you and I are on Zoom. How do you recruit, hire, train people? Plenty of tools to do that, but it just makes it harder than delivering and then making sure you collect the money. So there's going to be some things we're all going to have to reevaluate.
Brian Summer and I did a similar episode where we talked about, both of us came from professional services. He was at Accenture, I was at PwC, and we were reminiscing at our career growth, right? The amount of mentoring we got as we were coming up through the career. That's going to be very tough to do. And, I suspect the supply chain of young talent, with campus recruiting becoming difficult, mentoring becoming difficult, will trail off a little bit. When I was graduating, to get a job at a big 8 firm was like prestigious. It's probably gonna, for a couple of years, be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, you're right. First of all, I was an engineer undergraduate, and the best engineers were recruited by IBM or HP back when I got out of school. But then if you weren't in that track, as you really know, the smartest people went into the management consulting fields. And when I got my MBA, it was the same way. All the best people went into management consulting because it was a great career. You got to travel, you got to learn, and then maybe one day you'd run your own company. And so you're right. Now, again, I'm trying not to be too fearful, because I just feel like soon enough. And one of the questions we asked was, when do people think it'll sort of be back to, quote, normal again? And you could say this year, next year, never. The people thought within a year or so, somewhat normal. So I think you'll still have the opportunity to mentor young people, Accenture, at PwC, they'll have that ability, but there's no doubt for the next, maybe year or so, it's just going to be a little more difficult to do that.
Dave, this has been wonderful. Great to see you. You're looking good, looking relaxed. Merry Christmas. Thank you so much.
You too. Thanks a lot, Vinnie. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon, okay?
Thank you.